For this initiative, and I would like to say thank you for the Hellenian Wind Energy Association, and I'm very pleased to be here, to be invited for this discussion. Also, thank you for the interpreters. They are having sometimes a harder time to interpret this more emotional discussion about this. A little bit of emotion is important, but they thank you for helping us to follow the discussion. So my name is Paulo Cardoso from Portugal. I have been working as a consultant. I am a biologist, have been working as a consultant for the last 25 years, most of this time in licensing and post-construction monitoring of wind farms in Portugal and abroad, but also in South America and Africa and other countries here in Europe. Just a previous note, we heard today a few key messages and a few keywords like commitment or transparency or increased dialogue, but also databases and the importance of compiling information. And all these keywords, I think it will be present I will touch on them in a way or another with my presentation, and at the end I think I will present some questions. I will end my presentation with a question, and I would like to hear from the audience the perspective. So this is our perspective on wind development and the wind development scenario in Portugal. Just to set the scene, I will be discussing the wind energy development in Portugal in the last two decades and how the process was conditioned by our regulatory framework, the natural and geographical and human context. And you will find, as Andreas mentioned, some similarities with the Greek context in developing wind energy and this reconciling this with natural conservation and natural resources. And by the end, I will present a question regarding the opportunities and challenges that we face in the actual panorama of developing wind energy with this speed-up movement. Something very briefly about natural context here in Portugal. We have 23.4% of our continental territory covered by some level of natural protection. We have our network of protected areas that integrate the ancient protected areas itself, like natural reserve, national parks, with the new Natura 2000 sites. All this together covers 23.4% of our territory. I think it's quite similar to what you have here in Greece, about 30% here. 27.
Yes, in our country.
Also, I took a very simplistic approach just to evaluate where the good wind is, what the commercial wind is in Portugal. And you have 42% of good winds, commercial winds, is inside protected areas that are covered by some kind of protection or sensitive areas nearby. So 22% of all resources are inside protected areas. But we are exploring those resources. We could not do this without exploring those resources, and this number may be more important if we consider the connection points in our grid network. Of course, we have to consider in these equations where the demand is and where the grid network is to build a wind farm. We cannot build there where there is no connection point. We cannot build there where the resource is not there, at least a good resource. So I think this is also something that you will find some similarities with the Greek context. But we have developed wind farms inside protected areas in Natura 2000 sites. But very soon, with dialogue, we agreed, the authorities, developers, consultants, etc., agreed in leave out some areas of wind development, particularly this national park, this Jerez National Park and Montezinho Natural Reserve. And this was based only on dialogue. Please, let's not put wind development in those areas. The resources there, a lot of resources there, but this is wide mountain ranges in Portugal. It's the only wide mountain range that we have in Portugal. And this is a more agroforestry landscape with low intensity agriculture. And it's a human landscape that we identify that it should be preserved nationally. So the general development, we saw today a lot of discussion about instruments that could be used if area assessment is the instrument that should guide the development of wind energy, etc. And we developed the wind energy inside our protected area network was always guided by this planning, the special planning of those protected sites and in articulation with the guidance, conservation guidance from Natura 2000 sites that I believe that you also have here in Greece. So one is the special planning instrument for the natural reserves in our national park and all protected areas that is not Natura 2000 site. From Natura 2000 sites, we take the recommendations and we combine them with the planning where they overlap with a protected area, the ancient protected area, but also with municipality level landscape planning. So this is all articulated and evaluated under area assessment. And beside that, development of wind energy in Portugal, inside protected areas in Natura 2000 sites are always binded to decisions from our nature conservation authorities. So we can propose a project for one area if you are inside that designated area, we will always be binded by the decision from our nature conservation authority. And this is just a picture of the scenario in 2021. We have installed so far almost 6 gigawatts of installed capacity in 288 wind farms, 2,060 and 640 wind turbines. And we see that 31% of all wind turbines was installed inside designated areas, protected areas on Natura 2000 sites, and about 30% of installed capacity is inside the protected areas. So the scenario is also similar to what we have here in Greece and in Spain is about the same. And as I said, to licensing this, we follow the regulation. It's as simple as that. And EIA is the instrument that combines all the regulatory and the regulatory instruments of the landscape and other restrictions, territorial restrictions, but also we evaluate the natural value of the site. And when we are inside the protected area, we always do this. In our EIA assessment, this is something that was progressively being understood in Portugal, of course, in the 90s of the early 2000s. Those definitions of what is an effect and how we can distinguish impact of the population level was not there, but we progressively are better informed to provide this information with the EIA report. So we evaluate the effects, particularly when we are inside protected areas, you try to distinguish impact of the population level. We do this always with dialogue and transparency among the stakeholders. And in Natura 2000 sites or protected areas, we always follow the planning and restriction. I hear today some definitions about these regulatory instruments, special planning that you have here. We also have them in Portugal at the municipal level that we integrate into the area scope just to understand where we can go, where we cannot go, what we can do, what we cannot do. All area studies inside protected areas, we have 1 year of baseline studies combined with a post-construction monitoring of at least 3 years. So we have at least 4 years that we can combine in an experimental design just to evaluate the signal, the strength of the effects, and inform authorities and other stakeholders in this process. But also we have special cases in Portugal, both for the process following the project lifetime. For example, in this wind farm here is Candeeiros wind farm. We are monitoring this wind farm since 2005, and we were involved in the area assessment 2003, 2004. And we are still doing this, applying the adaptive management over the monitoring programs that was defined 17 years ago, and we have adapted these plans. We have done a lot. I will not discuss the details here, but just to show you that we have projects in Portugal that are being monitored since the construction. They will be monitoring during the entire life cycle of the project. We also have other projects in southeast of Portugal here because of migratory species that cross that area that is being monitored since 2006 or 7, I think. And the monitoring program will continue because those are important areas for birds, for example. And regarding the measuring effects, distinguishing them, we were able, because we have so many monitoring efforts in Portugal, we have compiled, we at Bionsight, 106 monitoring studies in 15 years with all these efforts in searching trials of carcass trials to understand what is the effects of wind farms on birds at a national level. So we are evaluating the cumulative effects of wind farms in Portugal just to understand this is a Bayesian posterior probability that we are taking about 1.3 individuals per megawatt per year outside protected areas and a little bit less inside protected areas. We have estimated this with a few models, but the new model have an estimation of about 5,000 individuals being birds generally removed from their populations annually. But we need to translate this in impact at the population level. So we were able, with all this information, to rank these species, the effects of individuals being removed by collisions with wind turbines, and we analyze it for many of them. I will just present 2 examples here for 2 raptor species. And this is how we are approaching the impact of the population level. We are bringing this to a study just to evaluate in a 50 years time frame what will be the fate of that population, removing the number of individuals that was modeled using not the GNest as was presented here today, but with USO, that is also an estimator that incorporate the search trials, the removal of carcass by scavengers, but also the ability of the searcher to observe the carcasses there. And this, I'm not entering technicalities, but basically for the Griffon voucher, we are affecting about 1.1% of the population with the level of the capacity installed in Portugal at this moment, but the population will be at some risk of extinction, different from zero, if we would be removing 9.2% of that population. It means that, of course, there is uncertainty on these measures, and we evaluate the stress of the vital rates of the species, but also the elasticity of those vital rates and how this influence this model here. But we can inform that we are far from reaching any population level impact with this fatality that we are causing at wind farms in Portugal, at least for the resident population. And the same apply for the other raptor. Yes, we are being called to act, so we need to speed up the energetic transition. We need to reduce the dependence on external sources, particularly in the last 2 years. And we are being forced to review, as we discussed it here today, the legal framework and simplify the licensing processes. But also in Portugal, in moving towards this approach of go, no-go area. And here are some numbers of what we have installed, what we was presented in our national energy and climate plan for the European Union in 2018. But with these new targets from Repower EU, we have to do better than that, about 10 gigawatts of wind energy in Portugal. So a final message here, we have a few challenges to accomplish with. It's a common requirement. We will need to develop the renewables, but what to do when we are already inside the protected area network? How we will deal with the repowering and this go, no-go planning when we are there already? Those areas will be designated as no-go areas when we can no longer repower those projects. Typically, we will be reducing the number of wind turbines in this situation. But also the hybridization. We have a connection point. The grid line is there. It's much more time-consuming to expand the transmission network. And how will you take advantage of those connection points? There is some discussions. We will increase the footprint. Are we increasing the threats? But at the same time, as we discussed it here today, this somehow is contradicting what we need to do to reverse the biodiversity loss and restore habitats. But there is opportunities that we can do. Today we can do better studies with all the information that we are collecting. We have better knowledge. Science have evolved a lot. There is no longer those, I heard today that, well, some technical documents or information is not accessible to everyone, but at least for those that are involved in impact assessment, they should know this information. We have much better and effective tool for mitigation technology. We have Greek companies developing artificial intelligence and implement them just to bring collisions to zero to some species. And today we know how, we will discuss this later, how to implement positive actions and implement net gain, the net gain actions in those projects. Why not? And finally, this go, no-go area discussion should be installed more wind energy inside protected areas. Well, if we can mitigate effects and create positive ones, we would say, why not? And thank you.